Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. I've written a lot of how-to self-help stuff. 13 books and probably more than 4,500 articles at this point, including for Time, The Atlantic, U.S. News, and over 2,100 for Psychology Today. And so my goal, perhaps ambitious for this, is to share with you what I found has enabled me to be so prolific and yet publishable. I would not describe myself as a perfectionist, which is why I prefer the short form, and I also prefer practicality a lot. And so my plan, so I'll give you kind of an advanced look at it. I'm planning on starting by talking with you about topics, how to choose a topic, whether and how to do any pre-writing before you actually begin the writing. And then I thought the most useful way I can get into the nitty-gritty of my thought process is I'm going to walk you through my very most recent article. I deliberately decided to do it, not cherry-picked. But it's a bit controversial, so that it will hopefully address how do you deal with today's environment, which I believe is too subject to what I call the 3 C's: censure, censor, and cancel. And then we'll review, and then hopefully we'll say something. I have no idea what the hell I'm going to say, but that will end up being legitimately inspiring, not BS inspiring. So, okay, topics. I mean, obviously you want to write about something you know about or interested in, but it can be more subtle than that. Let's say you don't know a lot about a topic, but you would like to learn a lot more. Some of the best ways, they say one of the best ways to learn is to teach. Well, one of the ways we teach is by writing. And so you might want to take a topic you really are curious about and write about it, but don't have the hubris to think you're an expert. Make clear that that your expertise is conjectural or anecdotal or gotten from somebody else, so that you're not guilty of that enormous hubris that too many writers and journalists are subject to, claiming more expertise than they have. Maybe more important than any of that in choosing a topic is to choose a topic that, well, first let me say, you've got to put yourself in the shoes of your audience first and foremost. Unless you're James Joyce, you can't simply write stream of consciousness, be impenetrable like Finnegan's Wake. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the audience and focus on clarity. That's what certainly, clarity more than art is key to practical self-help writing if you're trying to help folks, not just expulsively share your feelings, your thoughts, or whatever. You want to do that, write poetry. Here I'm talking with you about helping people with your writing, with the things that matter to them, that are important, and this is an important point, things that they don't already know. So much of what is written is just common sense. That's not going to help. If they already know that, sure, if it's common sense that's often forgotten or whatever, fine. But in general, you want your absolute filter for what you want to write about. The main points are points that are important to your audience and not obvious and not otherwise top of mind and already known. I think that's all I want to say about topics. Now let's talk about pre-writing. I know that writers vary enormously in this. So again, to avoid my having hubris, I am not going to say you need to do it this way. Let me just describe to you the extent to which I pre-write, how I do it, and if I do it at all. Sometimes, as I will, before I sit down at the computer, I will get away from my computer. I will sit on my sofa with just a pad of paper, and I will sit and I'll say what is important, my main important points that are not obvious, not just common sense, that I want to make around this topic. And I'll simply jot them down. 3, 4, 5, 8 points. And I will sit, then I'll just breathe for a minute or two and say, what else? I won't rush right. I'll give it an extra minute or two. Once I've done that, I go to the computer and I simply type in those things that I handwritten, those main points. And then I'll sit maybe 30 seconds, a minute, depends on the situation. And then I'll either put them in, I might put them in an order that seems more logical, those 3, 5, 8 points. Or I might not even. And then I usually just start. I start, and again, I am always putting myself in the shoes of my audience and saying, what do they want? What do they need? What are their objections? I haven't mentioned this yet. What are their likely objections that I should preempt? If I am to open their mind to what I have to say, I need to let them know I can relate to their problem or their situation and preempt any objections they might have. And then I typically, again, not always, but usually, I will then just start from the very beginning. Not get to my talking points just yet, but have a very brief introduction. Don't make your introduction too long. People want to get to the meat right away. Just long enough to hook them, let them know you understand them or you care about them, or you're going to address their issues. You can do that usually in, as they say, 50 words or less, or something like that. And then get right to your main points. And so I will start right from the beginning with that introduction, and I will try to simply write a crappy first draft to the very end. And I will not usually let my butt leave the chair until that article, and I write short. My articles tend to be 400 to 1,000 words. Partly that's because I'm now employed by Psychology Today, and that's the limit they like. But also, I just think that also honors my readers' time. Everybody's got so much to do. So many choices of what to read. So many things, they want to take care of their child. They need to do their work for work. They need to clean the toilet. I am aware of my audience's time. I try to write so that there isn't an extra word. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I won't write a little something that's funny, but usually it'll be just a turn of phrase, something that doesn't take a lot of time, but just something to leaven my natural intensity and the concentration of my writing. My writing is very distilled, very concentrated, as you're going to see. Anyway, those are my thoughts, and I thought now, before any more of this kind of abstraction that I'm sharing with you, I picked just the most recent article I wrote, mainly both because I didn't want to cherry pick, but as important because it is somewhat controversial in today's era of what I call the 3 C's. If you dare be politically incorrect, you are subject to censure, and cancel. So I picked one that has that danger. And yes, I do skirt from the most difficult topics that just are third rails, and people are just so ideologically tied to their views, say, about race, gender, sexual orientation, that I'm usually not the best person, partly because of my intensity and sometimes not sufficient tact to be writing on those third rail issues. But here's one that comes pretty damn close. And now I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to stop. I'm going to read it out loud. And then I'm going to, as if there's a principle I use or some thinking that went through my head as I was writing it, I'm going to share that with you in hopes that might be useful in the article that you want to write. It might help, before we go any further, for you to think about what topic you might like to write about. What is something not obvious, important, that you care about? Now, of course, this is when there's a drill going on. I'm going to close the window, see if that reduces endless noise. Okay, so I'm glad I actually got up and give you a chance to think for a moment. What's important, a topic not obvious that you either know a lot about or want to learn more about, because you can use secondary sources. A Google search enables you to learn a tremendous amount very, very quickly. Think about that topic. All right, and now, maybe with that in mind, or maybe not, here is my most recent article that I just posted on Psychology Today. It's called Being a Capitalist in a Changing America. Now, even the title, or I was thinking of calling it How to Be a Capitalist in a Changing America, but how to is more prescriptive, which people like, but being is a little less prescriptive. I'm not sure which is better, but that's the kind of thing I worry about. Is it better to be so prescriptive, say how to? 7 keys to being a capitalist? Just being a capitalist? No right or wrong there. Now, I was thinking about my first draft was being a capitalist in an ever more socialist America. But that's such a hot button word, and even though I believe it's accurate, I thought it would be unnecessarily off-putting. I don't want to create antipathy unnecessarily. I'll say what's very important to say, even at the risk of taking a hit, but no reason for me to use the word socialist, because it's charged. I could be accused of, we're not really socialist. So I thought I'd use in this case, instead of the very specific word, the vaguer word changing. So, being a capitalist in a changing America. And now I'll start reading the article itself. Society's mind molders, the schools, colleges, news media, and entertainment media, are moving us to believe in a we, not me, community, collective approach to policy and individual behavior. Now, that's pretty controversial. That's not necessarily, because some people say, oh no, the media is right-wing, look at Fox News. But I felt it was very important to make that claim, which I deeply believe is true, even at the risk of alienating people. So just the rule I just said before doesn't always apply. I'm just sharing with you what went through my head, and hopefully it's helpful. Then I'm going to continue reading. Yet some people, often cowed by the 3 C's of censure, censor, and cancel. It was a concept that came to me a month ago, and I use it periodically because it feels so right, and we all do well with distillations, with sound bites, as long as they're not too reductionistic. So, yet some people, often cowed by the 3 C's of censure, censor, and cancel, quietly believe, again that word was right, quietly, because they usually don't speak up. I thought that was the accurate word. Quietly believe that greater net good accrues. Notice I didn't say greater good, greater net good, because there's some bad things about capitalism, bad things about socialism, but I wanted to be nuanced. That's one of my favorite words. Because I said, some people quietly believe that greater net good accrues from the primacy of the individual and largely free market capitalism. So I very concisely stated the contrary positions. Today's kind of hegemonic thoughts about the primacy of we, not me, community, the collective, all in, together, all of that concept, against this certain percentage of people. I didn't say many people, I said some people. That gave me a little wiggle room, because it's hard to say exactly how many, but there certainly are some people that do believe that greater net good accrues from the primacy. I didn't say that it's right at the primacy. In other words, again, there's nuance. Instead of saying black and white, the primacy of the individual and largely free market capital. I didn't say exclusively, because very few things are that black and white, and it's very important in writing. That is a generalizable principle, to not overstate certitude. Allow for some wiggle room, because that's the real world. There are very few black and white truths. Okay, moving on. Such people believe that the freedom to decide where best to devote their time and treasure. Now, I didn't use their money and effort because I wanted a little humor. I wanted to be a little more bulletproof. That time and treasure, that's a relatively common cliche that has a little bit of a lilt to it. It therefore is a little less objectionable while still making my point. The freedom to decide where best to devote their time and treasure will yield more good than surrendering their time and treasure. I said surrendering it, but that was a mistake. It should be surrendering them. So that was a mistake. Even though it's published, I made that error of number. It should be surrendering them to the state or even to social pressures. Notice I kept it very brief. Social pressures. I didn't say social media. I didn't say the mainstream media. I said social pressures. Good, concise way. I try to save my reader every unnecessary word. As I said, I value their time. I realize I am privileged to be getting some of their time in reading my stuff, and the least I can do is try to distill, because every extra word dilutes. If you make it really crisp and concise, you're presenting a distillation, which is what people deserve. Okay, Continuing to read. So such people believe that the freedom to decide where best to devote their time and treasure will yield more good than surrendering them to the state or even to social pressure. Such people point to communist countries with shortages rife. That's exactly the right word. It's not hurry shortages, but shortages rife because too few people would sustainably sacrifice me for we, or work hard when they get the same pay for doing minimal work. I'm trying to make the core pro-capitalist argument so that people don't immediately just viscerally, because so many people these days are anti-capitalist. Capitalism is a dirty word in the minds of much of the media and the schools and the colleges, and I wanted to make the case without being unnecessarily inflammatory about that there is a rational basis for advocating for at least a large measure of capitalism. I continue. Pro-capitalist people may support a taxpayer-paid safety net. Again, I didn't want to portray the real extremes. I said, okay, because people could be very capitalist and still recognize the need for a taxpayer-paid safety net, but fear that additional forced redistribution, in other words, of course we've had redistribution for a long time, but additional, which is where we're headed now, additional forced, it's a powerful word, means taxation, which is force, additional forced redistribution from society's tax-paying contributors. I wanted to underline that it's taxpayers, it's not just government, the taxpayer money comes from us. The additional forced redistribution from society's tax-paying contributors yields a net negative, eating our seed corn. Metaphor is very often an inaccurate term, but here I like it because seed corn is the corn that if you eat that, you can't plant your next year's crop. I like the term eating our seed corn. And then I cite Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell wrote, quote, "One of the sad signs of our times is that we have demonized those who produce, subsidized those who refuse to produce, and canonized those who complain," end quote. Now I continue to read. And this is a little longer introduction than normal, but it's such an important thing. It's important for me to have made that pro-capitalist argument because there's such antipathy to it. So that unless I took a few paragraphs to make it at least seem defensible, the reader might just go and say, "To hell with you, goodbye." So I wanted to take the time. I consciously made the choice to go beyond my usual very short introduction and get to my main points. I felt it was important to lay the foundation so that my reader is not prematurely turned off. Also, if somebody is pro-capitalist, I think it would encourage them to see that I am not just going to bash them, but I'm going to fair-mindedly make the case for their position. And I continue to write. And now I'm getting to the meat, which is advice. I said, being a capitalist in a changing America. The following may be helpful to people who are swimming against the tide. You're going to see that later I'm going to use that tide metaphor. Sometimes it seems cheesy. I made a decision that it was not cheesy. You'll see whether you agree or not. Okay, so now the first point. And I very often will bullet or boldface the summary of the point. So the first point I'm making is, recognize that you may be wrong. Listen respectfully to others' points of view. Ask questions. Also ask them questions that might get them to consider your point of view. Now I listed that first again, worried about the cancel culture, the censorship that I wanted, and the censure. I wanted my readers to realize that I am not necessarily saying capitalism is right. I want to encourage nuance, open-mindedness, and so I thought it was wise to lead with that tip. The next tip, and I'm very specific and balanced. Listen respectfully to others' points of view. Ask questions. Also ask them questions that might get them to consider your point of view. Notice how actionable. Notice that I'm not using fancy language or long sentences. I will when that's necessary, when the liability of a long sentence is outweighed by the intelligence or nuance or whatever what I'm saying, then I will use it. But I will want to defer to simplicity if I can. The next tip. If you're social, find ideological kindred spirits. I made a point, I originally in my first draft wrote, if you're social, find kindred spirits, but that's a little unclear as to what I mean by that. And so I figured it was worth the extra word. I like to avoid adjectives normally and focus on verbs, but I felt that I needed to add that word ideological because clarity is king. I want to make sure it's crystal clear. My goal is to have readers not have to reread what I've written, but be able to have a nice, pleasant pass through the article and come away with a takeaway. Okay. So the second point is, if you're social, find ideological kindred spirits. And I continue to read here. More than I can recall in my lifetime. By the way, I use the first person my only when I feel it's necessary. I don't want it to seem egotistical. So I will normally avoid using the first person, but that's not a black and white rule. And in this case, I felt I needed to acknowledge that the basis for my assertion that I'm going to make here is personal experience. And I guess because I'm old, I'm 71, maybe there's a little more gravitas that comes because I've had a larger database of experience. Okay, more than I can recall in my lifetime. People seem, and again, that's another wiggle room word, avoids my seeming too sure of myself. People seem to befriend only people in their ideological bubble. So you may, again, I'm saying you should, or you may want, no reason for me to be unnecessarily hierarchical or directive. So you may want to seek kindred spirits. That said, it might work if you steer clear of politics or test the waters with a prospective friend to see if he or she is open to you, despite or even because of your worldview. Very actionable, not such a short sentence, but I like to think that was very clear writing, which again, clarity is king. The next tip, accept and redirect, and I made it a question mark. My first draft did not make it a question mark. I want to not be overly prescriptive. I want to offer suggestions that are actionable, but not force it down anybody's throat. Accept and redirect. And I continue to read here. America's leftward move may be inexorable for the foreseeable future. Now, inexorable is a fancy word, but it's exactly the right word. I will sacrifice a bit of simplicity for saying the right word. I don't want to be condescending to my reader and just only use simple words. I'll default to simple words, but if there's a more arcane but accurate word, I will use that. So America's leftward move may be inexorable for the foreseeable future. I had originally written for a decade, but I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable enough to know how long, but I can say for the foreseeable future, it appears to be inexorable. Now, I could expand on that and talk about it in great detail. What are the forces, the vectors that are moving things leftward, but that would have been an unnecessarily distracting tangent. And I want to stay focused so that my reader gets to the takeaways mainly. I only will go on that tangent if I feel it's necessary for my reader to be open to the points of view or the prescription or the ideas that I'm going to share. So, accept and redirect. America's leftward move may be inexorable for the foreseeable future. If so, again, I'm giving myself wiggle room. I'm not so sure of myself. You may be wise. Again, I didn't say you're wise too, or you're smart too, or you should. I said, if so, you may be wise to redirect your attention and efforts to more fruitful pursuits. Now again, I could have said your efforts, but I like that concept that you may want to redirect your attention. If you are a very pro-capitalist person, and you're focused on politics, etc., it's not just your efforts, but you may not want to spend so much time reading the media or watching the media. So I added that word. So, if the leftward move may be inexorable for the foreseeable future, you may be wise to redirect your attention and efforts to more fruitful pursuits. I took time to think about, I didn't say better pursuits. Why? I used fruitful. Who could be against fruitful? And it's the accurate word. It describes that which is going to yield a benefit, more fruitful pursuits. For example, if you're a psychotherapist, and because I was writing for Psychology Today that has a lot of psychotherapists and other counselor readers, I use disproportionately, not only, I will disproportionately use psychotherapist examples. So I wrote, for example, if you're a psychotherapist, focus on being the very best one you can be. Do think twice before sharing your views with clients, especially to clients who would likely find your views anathema. And again, now anathema is a big word, but that is a precisely accurate word. It's that they would find it, they would revolt, they would be repelled by it, they would find it, it would shut them off to you. Anathema, in one word, says exactly what I want to say. Continuing to read. Any pro-capitalist activism may well be for naught, a thimble against a tidal wave, and you might get drowned in the undertow. Remember I mentioned the tide metaphor before? Here I'm playing it out. You'll see I'll play it out one more time in a moment. I'll read it again. Any pro-capitalist activism may well be for naught, a thimble against a tidal wave. It's very vivid. But I don't believe it's necessarily hyperbolic. I try to avoid hyperbole. A thimble against a tidal wave. Now, some readers may disagree, but it was my best judgment. A thimble against a tidal wave, and you might get drowned in the undertow. The metaphor works, at least as far as I'm concerned. So, at least until the tide turns, I didn't say at least. So, until the tide turns, at least a bit, I'm staying with the metaphor as long as it feels apt, it may be wise to focus your pro-capitalist energy on learning about the art of activism and about capitalism, as well as liberal democracy and socialism, right? I'm not trying to have my reader be ideologues. It is my undergirding belief that wisdom resides across the ideological spectrum. So I'm not here to just vindicate their love of capitalism. My real goal is to get them to not necessarily surrender their views, but to become a more thoughtful person. I then write, you may moderate your views, or at minimum, as every good lawyer knows, you need to be able to respond to your opponent's best arguments. If all that seems too capitulating, now is it putting myself in the shoes of the reader and saying, oh my God, I'm asking these pro-capitalists to capitulate so much of what they believe. So I felt I needed to say that. So I wrote, if all that seems too capitulating, capitulating again is a perfect word. I know it's not a common word, but it means giving in, giving up to whatever. If all that seems too capitulating, perhaps you will want to be like one of my clients. He said, I need to fight the good fight even if I go down trying. And then I end this little blog post by saying, of course, it's easier to ride with the wave than against it. I acknowledge that, and again, using that metaphor. Perhaps and again, I use the word perhaps now, perhaps one or more of these ideas will make you less likely to wipe out. Again, very often the last sentence, the last phrase, is a punchline. It's either, and in this case, I'm staying with that riding, surfing, water, tide metaphor, making you less likely to wipe out. And there you go. I will often end an article, by the way, with, is there one or more of the ideas in this article that you would like to try, if only as an experiment? Again, I'm not pushing it down their throats, but I like my work to be actionable. And then end with saying, giving them the agency. Is there something you want to try? And even as an experiment, which is I totally believe as a career counselor, we're always doing experiment. We're not making a lifetime commitment to anything. We're going to try something. And that's the spirit in which I often end my self-help articles. Okay, so just a few of the points that I made that are worthy of review. One, put yourself in the shoes of the audience. Write about what they would be interested in that isn't obvious, but is important to them, but you're also interested in and may even find fun, to either solidify your knowledge or to learn more about something. Keep your writing short. Distill. You want to respect your reader's time. Now, there wasn't much humor in this blog post, but a little turn of phrase can often be good, and I think my turn the tide metaphor at least lightens it up a bit. Other points you want to make? Avoid black and white thinking. Black and white thinking, first of all, is likely to be untrue and create unnecessary antipathy from your reader. So give yourself wiggle room by using phrases like, it appears this, or mostly it seems that, or I've noticed this, or You might want to consider X, so that you're not banging people over the head, which invites antipathy. You're showing that you do not have hubris. You're merely representing a perspective that you believe is worthy of their consideration. And then I guess all I want to say is, you notice I've tried to demonstrate, I do think hard about every word. Should it be the simpler word? Should it be the more precise word? Sometimes if a word is too arcane, I might even define it. I might say that, for example, I recently wrote something with the word tautology in it, and it was exactly the right word. But I need to explain what a tautology is. It means it's something that is self-evident, redundant, so think hard about whether an extra word or the more arcane word is worth it. And finally, you usually want to conclude with a call to action that isn't insistent, but asking them, is there an idea or two in this post, article, whatever, that you would like to try, if only as an experiment, which I like an awful lot. And then you want to end with, if you can, a little punchline, if you can, that doesn't seem silly, but in this case, I use the wipe. I said wipe out because I was using the tide and surfing metaphor throughout. Okay, so those are my main points. I want to end by simply saying to you, it's a cliche that the pen is mightier than the sword. That's an arguable point, but it's certainly mighty. And as long as you take your responsibility very seriously, even if you're only going to have 5 readers, those are 5 human beings whose lives could be enhanced or hurt by your writing. Avoiding excessive hubris, focusing on what's important but not obvious to your core audience, and being concise and respectful of their time. And I believe that there are few activities in this world that are more useful than writing, whether it be your own personal blog that a few people will read, or a YouTube video, or if you're fortunate enough to get to write for a publication, so be it. In any event, I'm Marty Nemko. I do thank you for watching. I welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel, which normally consists of my reading aloud, my self-help advice, my articles from Psychology Today, but it's occasionally punctuated by my playing the piano, my podcast, which I may turn this into, reading other people's work. I just did one on my favorite Mark Twain quotes. I've read some James Herriot, the guy the veterinarian who wrote All Creatures Great and Small. But in any event, I do thank you for watching. I am Marty Nemko.